Sheikh, I think you can start.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome once again to another UCT MSA weekly talk on perfecting Salaah, and inshallah this evening's topic will be forgetfulness, nullifiers, and the differences between male and female in Salaah. It will be a bit lengthy, but inshallah we will finish in due time, inshallah, bismillah. So without further ado, let's continue. So inshallah we start with the prostration of forgetfulness. So the prostration of forgetfulness is recommended after certain actions if omitted, which will be discussed shortly. If it is not performed, the prayer will still be valid. So you get something as sujood sahwi. This is a prostration, a sujood that you perform if you leave out something in salah, if you forget about something in salah. But this prostration of forgetfulness in itself is recommended. So if you forget to perform the prostration of forgetfulness, then your salah will still be valid. It should be noted that the prostration of forgetfulness is recommended for the imam and the individual who have forgotten an action during the prayer. So if you're standing as the imam or you're performing salah on your own and you forget something in your salah, then it is recommended for you to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. However, for the follower, if he forgets while following the imam, he does not need to perform the prostration of forgetfulness, or he does not at all perform the prostration of forgetfulness. Meaning, if you are following the imam and if you get something in your salah, you do not perform the prostration of forgetfulness after your salah. You just follow the imam and that's enough. The prostration of forgetfulness is only for the individual performing salah on their own or for the imam leading in salah. Furthermore, it becomes compulsory upon the follower to follow the imam in the prostration of forgetfulness if the imam has forgotten. So let's say you are following the imam. You performed your salah perfectly, you forgot nothing in your salah, but the imam forgot something in his salah. So he will be performing the prostration of forgetfulness. You have to follow him in that. Even though you did not forget anything, it's compulsory upon you to follow the imam. And therefore, it's very important to know that whatever the imam does in salah, you should follow the imam, unless he does something that is not part of the salah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the imam for us to follow in salah. As previously discussed, a prayer consists of three types of actions, which are arkans, which are pillars, ab'ad, which are favorable recommended actions, and hay'at, which are recommended actions. These three types of actions have consequences when omitted in prayer. This will be discussed in the following slides. So inshallah, we'll be discussing what happens if you leave out a pillar of salah, what happens if you leave out a favorable recommended action of salah, and what happens if you leave out a recommended action, meaning you forget to perform these things and you leave it out in the salah. How do you fix your salah? How do you complete your salah? And we'll discuss that inshallah. So the first one that we are doing is omitting a pillar in salah, meaning a rukun, plural, arkan. So if you leave out any of the arkan of salah, what happens? So if one leaves out a pillar intentionally, example, prostrating before bowing. So you are standing up in the standing position and you go down to prostration without going to the bowing position. Usually you stand and then you go into ruku and then you go into sujood. But now you go straight down in sujood without performing the bowing, the ruku. What happens? His entire prayer will be null and void. So if you do it intentionally, if you skip or omit or leave out any of the pillars intentionally in the salah, your entire salah is null and void. However, if he leaves out this pillar forgetfully, then everything he performs after the left out pillar will be null and void. Meaning the beginning of the salah will be valid, but whatever he performs thereafter will be null and void, will be nullified. This is because these pillars are done in the incorrect places in salah. Because after the standing position, you get the ruku'. But now you're placing in the ruku' position, you're placing a sujood, a prostration, and it shouldn't be there. And therefore it's all null and void. So there are three possibilities in terms of remembering the omitted pillar. So you forgot, and you've done this unintentionally, you forgot. So when you forget something, you have to remember that. So there are three possibilities when you can remember the thing that you forgot. So we speak about the pillars, and we are speaking about the possibilities of when you can remember that and what happens, what's the consequences. Okay. So the first possibility, if he remembers before the next rak'ah, then he must perform it immediately when he remembers. If he delays, his prayer will be null and void. What does this mean? If he, as mentioned before, left out a pillar, then he remembers it before the next rak'ah. He's still in the first rak'ah. He remembers that he forgot the pillar before he enters into the next rak'ah. When he remembers, immediately he goes to the pillar that he left out. An example. So let's say Ahmed forgot to recite Surah Al-Fatiha in his first rak'ah of Dhuhr. So Dhuhr has 4 rak'ahs, and he forgot to recite Surah Al-Fatiha in his first rak'ah. When he went down in prostration of the same rak'ah, he remembered that he did not recite Surah Al-Fatiha. So it was in the first rak'ah, he went to ruku, and then he went to sujood, but he remembered while he was in his sujood, while he was in his prostration, that he did not recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And Surah Al-Fatiha is a pillar of salah. What happens? He then immediately goes back up to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. He's in ruku, he's in sujood. So because he's in sujood and he remembered, he just stands up from sujood. He just stands up, immediately he stands up. He doesn't do anything else. He just stands up to go to that pillar that he forgot, and which is the pillar of reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. So he then immediately goes back up to recite Surah Al-Fatiha and complete his prayer from there. This would still be his first rak'ah. So he's going back to his first rak'ah to complete his first rak'ah. Therefore, he needs to complete his current rak'ah that he's in now when going back, after going back, and the other 3 rak'ahs of Dhuhr, because Dhuhr has 4. He's still completing his first one, and then he has another 3 to perform. It is recommended for him to perform the prostration of forgetfulness at the end of his prayer before the taslim. And we'll speak about this more at the end of how to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. So this is the first possibility, when he remembers before the next rak'ah. Okay. The second possibility, if he only remembers in the next rak'ah at the place where he left out the pillar in the previous rak'ah, he must perform the left out pillar. The current rak'ah will take the place of the previous rak'ah. This is because everything between when he left out the pillar and when he performed it is null and void. We mentioned, if you leave out a pillar, then anything you follow, or whatever you do thereafter will be null and void. So he left out a pillar in the first rak'ah. He continued until he went to the second rak'ah. So we left out the pillar till the second rak'ah will be null and void. So what happens? Look at the example, we'll explain more in detail. Let's say Ahmed forgot to perform the bow, the ruku' in the first rak'ah of Dhuhr. I went straight down into prostration. So he was standing and he went straight down in prostration. He did not perform the ruku'. He then continues his prayer as normal. So he doesn't know that he left out the ruku. He just continues his prayer as normal. When he bows down in the second rak'ah, he remembers that he did not perform the bow in the first rak'ah. So he's in the second rak'ah, but he forgot. He only remembers now that while he was in the second rak'ah now, he remembers that in the first rak'ah, he did not perform the ruku, the bow. The second rak'ah will take the place of the first rak'ah. Therefore, he needs to complete his current rak'ah and the other 3 rak'ahs of dhuhr. It is recommended for him to perform the prostration of forgetfulness at the end of his prayer before the taslim. So because he continued his salah into the second rak'ah, that from the time that he left out the pillar until the second rak'ah will be null and void. And therefore, when he remembered in the second rak'ah, that will still be part of his first rak'ah. Because he did not complete his first rak'ah because he forgot the pillar. And then from the time he forgot until the second rak'ah, that was null and void. So he didn't complete the entire first rak'ah. So his second rak'ah will take the place now of the first rak'ah. So this is when you remember when you're in the next rak'ah or in the other rak'ah after. The first possibility you remember before your completion of that rak'ah. This possibility, the second possibility, is when you remember after you complete a rak'ah. And let's move on to the third possibility. If he only remembers after the salam or the taslim that he has left out a pillar, meaning he said assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, he completed the salah, and then he only now realized that he left out a pillar. If it was the intention or the takbiratul ihram, then the entire prayer is null and void. So very important to note. If after he makes the taslim or the salam, he says assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, he completes his salah, then he remembers, but I did not make the intention of the salah, then his entire salah is null and void. He has to repeat the salah. If he remembers, I did not say takbiratul ihram, his entire salah is null and void and he has to repeat that salah. However, if it was anything other than the intention and the takbiratul ihram, he should build on his previous salah. This is if the time period interval between the previous prayer and when he is about to build on is short. Meaning, the time when he realizes and remembers that he left out a pillar and the time that he completes his salah, that time periods before when he realizes and he's going to start his salah now, if that time period is short, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, very short time period, then he just builds on. We will explain this in a moment. Even if he has turned away from the Qibla or spoken on condition that is short. So he's spoken very little words. He turned from the Qibla very shortly. Even if he done that, it's okay. He can still build on that salah that he did not complete a pillar or left out a pillar in. If it's a long interval, then the prayer should be performed from the beginning. So if he, for example, it was long interval, it was like 20 minutes or an hour, we've done something else. He spoke about some other stories and everything. It took a long time period before he remembered. Then he has to start the salah from the beginning again. So the example of this. Let's say Ahmed only remembers after the taslim that he has left out the bow in the third rak'ah of dhuhr. So dhuhr has 4 rak'ahs. He remembered after saying assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, he remembers now that I left out the ruku', the bow in the third rak'ah of dhuhr. The time period when he remembers and the prayer is short. So after that, immediately he remembered it was a short time period. He then stands up, sees the takbiratul ihram with intention, and performs 2 rak'ahs as normal. Because remember that the rak'ah, he forgot the bow. So that the whole rak'ah, the whole third rak'ah is null and void. The whole fourth rak'ah is null and void. Because from the time he missed out that pillar, anything that happens afterwards is null and void. So he has to now perform the 2 null and void prayers, which is the third rak'ah and the fourth rak'ah. So he then stands up, says the takbiratul ihram with the intention and performs 2 rak'ahs as normal, which will be the third now, and the fourth. He then performs the recommended prostration of forgetfulness at the end of his prayer before the taslim. This is the third possibility and the third example, and that is doing to do with the omitting a pillar in the salah. So now we move on. We move on to omitting a favorable recommended action, ab'ab. You see, we have the pillars, which is the arkan, which is obligatory, you have to do. Then you get the ab'ab, which is a favorable recommended action. It's a favorable recommended action. And if one leaves out a favorable recommended action in prayer, it is recommended to perform the prostration of forgetfulness at the end of the prayer before the taslim. So it's recommended. And we always say that the prostration of forgetfulness is recommended. But if you leave out a favorable recommended action is recommended. However, it should be noted, if a favorable recommended action is left out, it is prohibited, haram, to go back to it if one has moved onto an obligatory action, arkan. This is because of the principle, a recommended action is not given preference over an obligatory action. So this is the difference between the arkan and the ab'ad, between the pillars and the favorable recommended actions. The pillars are obligatory, and the favorable recommended actions are recommended. So if you leave out a pillar, you have to go back because it's obligatory. If you leave out a favorable recommended action and you moved on to an obligatory action, which is a pillar, then you can't go back to the favorable recommended action. Example will make it clear. An example: if Ahmed left out the first tashahhud and only remembers after moving on to the standing position that he left out the first tashahhud, he should not return to the first tashahhud, as it is prohibited for him to do so. Remember, we mentioned that one of the favorable recommended actions is the first tashahhud. And we see that a standing position is a rukun, it's a pillar of salah, you have to stand. So if you stood up after being in prostration in the second rak'ah, the last prostration in the second rak'ah, normally you sit in the tashahhud, the first tashahhud. But now you forgot and you went straight up to the standing position. If you're in the standing position, you do not sit down. You stand and you complete your salah, because that is known as a favorable recommended action, and you can't return to a favorable recommended action if you are in a rukun, a pillar, which is obligatory for you to do, which is the standing position. So if Ahmed returns to the first tashahhud while knowing it's prohibited, the prayer will be null and void. His entire prayer is null and void because he knew it's haram for him to go back, and he's still done that, therefore it's null and void. However, if he returned to the tashahhud position forgetfully, he forgot, he just went up and down, he forgot that it's haram again, or ignorant of its ruling, he doesn't know that it is prohibited, his prayer will remain valid. The same ruling is given to the qunut and other favorable recommended actions. Likewise in qunut, sometimes you forget the qunut. Sometimes you perform in the qunut and you forget. So what happens? We're speaking about the qunut of fajr. So fajr, in the i'tidal position, in the last rak'ah, after coming up from the ruku', you are in the standing position, the i'tidal, you are going to say the qunut. But what happens if you forget about that? You stand up from the ruku' and then you go into the i'tidal and go straight down into the prostration. If you go straight down and you're in your prostration already, then you can't stand up for qunut. But bear in mind, if you are more standing than sitting, then you can still stand up because you're not yet in a sitting position. Meaning, if you're more standing than going down in prostration. So normally in the crunch position, but you're more standing up than going down, then you can stand up still. So you like me to put down like maybe a few centimeters, maybe 5 centimeters down, or 7 or 10 maybe, and then you can still stand up. But if you went all the way down already, your hands are touching the ground, then of course, you know, you don't stand up. So if your knees are really touching the ground, then you don't stand up. Very important, because if you're already up, you stand up, and if you're already down, you sit down. So it's very important to understand that when it comes to the ab'ad, the favorable recommended actions of salah. There are some that calls it the greater recommended actions, but I don't use the word greater, because then if you say greater, then you also have these lesser recommended actions, which is no lesser recommended actions. All actions, all recommended actions are recommended to do. It's not lesser in any value. So the favorable recommended actions are the ab'ad. If you leave it out, you don't return to it if you went on already to an obligatory action, which is a rukun, a pillar. But you will still perform the the sujood of prostration, sorry, the sujood of forgetfulness before the taslim, before saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay. Omitting a recommended action, hayat. This is a recommended action, hayat. And hayat is like subhan rabbi al-a'la wa bihamdihi. Like we mentioned all of these things. If you leave that out, do not say subhan rabbi al-a'la wa bihamdihi or rabbi ighfirli and so forth. You leave those things out, you can't return to it. So if one leaves out a recommended action in prayer, one does not perform the prostration of forgetfulness. It is also not allowed to return to the recommended action when one remembers it, if one has performed an obligatory action already. So if you went on to the next pillar, then you don't go back to say that du'as and dhikr. Very important to note. And we mentioned this before, the seeds of the rahmah, because sometimes you forget these things, and imagine every time you perform your salah, you forget something like this, like one of the recommended actions of salah are the way to sit, and you sit wrong, and then you have to perform the procession of forgetfulness. It will be very difficult for you. And therefore, this is a rahmah, whereby if you do not perform any of these things by forgetting, you do not need to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. Okay. Move on. So what happens forgetting the number of rak'ats one has completed? What happens when one forgets the number of rak'ats one has completed? If one doubts the number of rak'at completed, one takes a certain number which is the least. It is then recommended to perform the prostration of forgetfulness at the end of the prayer before the taslim. An example: if Ahmad forgot the number of rak'at he has completed and doubts whether he completed 3 or 4 rak'at of dhuhr, he takes it that he only completed 3 and then completes an extra rak'ah. And the reason for this is that we always base things on certainty, not doubt. Certainty cannot be removed by doubt. What are we certain about? These two numbers, we have 3 and we have 4. We are certain that we perform 3 rakat, that you completed 3 rakat, but we are doubting if we completed the fourth rakat. But you are certain we completed 3. So therefore you based everything on the 3, the certainty. And therefore you have to add another raka'ah thereafter, which is the 4th one. So it takes it that he only completed 3 and then completes an extra raka'ah. It is then recommended for him to perform the prostration of forgetfulness at the end of the prayer before the taslim. Okay. So now we move on to how to perform the prostration of forgetfulness. It consists of 2 prostrations with the intention of performing the prostration of forgetfulness. So these 2 prostrations, it is 2 sujoods, and you just intend when you're performing the sujoods that you are performing them not because it is part of the salah itself, but it is because of you performing a prostration of forgetfulness. It is performed as the end. It is performed at the end of the prayer before the taslim. So after you see the tashahhud and your salawat and your du'as. If you're done with that, then just before you are going to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, before that, then you go down into sujood one time. You sit up in the sitting position, in the iftirash position, then you go again down, and then you go back up in the sitting position and you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. What do you recite? You recite the exact same things. The exact same things you would have recited while you were in the sitting position, and the exact same things you will recite when you were in the sujood. However, it's recommended to add the following by some scholars. Subhanalladhi la yanamu wa la yashu. Translation, glory unto him who does not sleep nor forget. So you say Subhan Rabbi al-A'la wa bihamdi, say 3 times, if you want to say 3 times or more. And then afterwards you will say Subhanalladhi la yanamu wa la yashu. It's recommended to say this, as some scholars has mentioned. Okay. We move now on to the nullifiers of prayer. For prayer to be valid, it must include the pillars of prayer, the pillars that you mentioned, and must also be free from anything that nullifies the prayer. We see the pillars is the bare minimum. So if you have the pillars, you have the bare minimum, you will have a valid salah. Plus, that salah should be free from anything that nullifies the salah, that invalidates the salah, that makes the salah null and void. So there are 2 requirements for valid salah. The first one, you have to include all the pillars, and the second is that it should be free from anything that nullifies the prayer. In this section, we will discuss the nullifiers of prayer, those things that makes the prayer null and void. Okay. Number 1, deliberate speech during prayer. A prayer is nullified if the deliberate speech consists of a single letter or more that conveys a meaning. So while you're in salah and you say oh, this is like oh, you will believe the oh boy, or oh person, oh Muhammad, that oh that you start with. If you say oh, that oh has a meaning, and therefore if you say that, the salah is nullified. Or if you say I has a meaning, one letter, but it has a meaning, it means you, I, the person speaking. So O or I, one letter, has a meaning, it nullifies the salah. It is also nullified if the deliberate speech consists of 2 or more consecutive letters that do not convey meaning. Examples, ba and da. Ba and da, if you say ba in salah, for no reason, deliberately, then your salah is invalid. It's nullified, it's void. And if you say da, because ba 2 letters, da 2 letters, and these consecutive letters, your prayer is null and void. As the Prophet ﷺ says that there should not be no speech in salah. You should not speak in salah. The prayer is not nullified by deliberate speech that occurs as part of supplication. So if you're making dua in your ruku' or in sujood, those du'as you make, or between the sittings, if you make your du'as there, or while you are standing in salah, while listening to the imam recite and you make dua after the ayah, you are speaking to Allah. And because you're speaking to Allah, the salah is not nullified. Because it's dua, you are speaking to Allah. As long as you're speaking to Allah, your salah is not nullified. Okay. It is also not nullified by speaking 6 consecutive words or less forgetfully. So sometimes if you get in your salah, Allah alam, why will you forget that you are in salah? But if you forget that you are in salah, for some reason, you just forgot that you are in salah for one moment and you said something. Maybe you were standing behind the imam and the imam was reciting and you just forgot and something came into your mind and you spoke. Or by being ignorant of its prohibition due to being new to Islam. So sometimes if you're just a newly reverted Muslim, you don't know that you can't speak in salah and you speak in salah. So if it's less than 6 consecutive words, then your salah is still valid. Okay. So it's very important, if not deliberately speak in salah. Number 2, excessive consecutive movements during prayer. The prayer is nullified if the excessive movements consist of 3 or more consecutive movements that are not of the prayer. So if you do something that is not of the prayer, it's not the ruku, it's not the sujood, this is not something of the prayer, you're doing something foreign, then your salah is nullified if it is more than 3 or more consecutive movements. And examples of movements that are not of the prayer is jumping. So if you start to jump in your salah and that jumping is more than 3 movements, or you move your arm or your legs, or you're taking steps, you're walking your salah. If these things are more than 3 consecutive movements, then your salah is nullified. This can also include adding more pillars to the prayer. An example, adding an additional prostration or bow to the prayer. You're adding things. You want to have one bow in a rak'ah, now you have 2 bows. You're adding a bow in dhuhr salah, in the first rak'ah dhuhr, doing it 2 times. And therefore, you're adding now things in your salah. And by adding those things in salah, you nullify your salah. Your salah will be null and void. It should be noted that minor consecutive movements, like the movements of the tongue in the mouth, moving it while in salah, or the eyelids, you're opening and closing your eyes, or the lips, you're moving your lips in salah, or your fingers without the palms, so you're only moving the fingers in your salah, but you're not moving the palms, would not nullify the prayer. Even though you do it a lot of times, it doesn't matter, because there are small minor movements. But major movements, you are seeing you move, you're seeing something different in your salah, which is not of salah, you're moving your hand, you're moving your leg, you're jumping, and these things, if it's more than 3 consecutive movements, that prayer will be nullified. Number 3, entering the state of minor or major spiritual impurity before the first taslim. So entering the state of minor or major spiritual impurity intentionally or unintentionally while praying will nullify one's prayer. So if you do it unintentionally, so if by some reason you break a wind in the salah, unintentionally, you did not intend that, but you hear sound and you smell something, you did not intend that, your salah is null and void, is nullified, because you entered into a minor state of spiritual impurity. This is because one of the conditions of the prayer is absent, which is to be in the state of minor and major spiritual purity. You have to be in spiritual purity. However, if one enters a state of minor or major spiritual impurity after the first taslim, his prayer will remain valid. So, for example, if you at the end of the salah and you say Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, the first one, and you then break a wind, your salah is still valid. Because the second one, as you mentioned, was a hay'ah of the salah. It's a sunnah of the salah, which is a recommended action of salah. It's not a rukun. It's not a pillar of the salah. So your salah was already completed when you said the first taslim. Okay. It should be noted, if one doubts whether they have entered the state of spiritual impurity during prayer, he should complete his prayer unless he is certain. So, while you're in the salah, you think to yourself, did I break a wind or not? I'm not sure, did I or not? You take that you did not. Because you are certain that you had wudu, but you doubt if you broke your wudu. And we mentioned this before, that doubt cannot remove certainty. So you're certain that you have wudu, but you doubt if you broke it, therefore you still have wudu, and you complete your wudu. Unless you're certain that you broke it, you smell something or you heard something, okay, okay, I broke my wudu. Okay, now you have to perform wudu and repeat your salah. Examples of entering the state of minor spiritual impurities are sleeping without one's buttocks grounded on the floor while sitting on them. This is examples. This is speak about when you actually set a minor impurity, not in salah, but this example, general examples. So a person can sleep, but if you're sitting on the floor and your buttocks is grounded to the floor, and you're sleeping in that position, and you wake up, you can complete your salah, you can perform salah. It's like some people, when they go to Jum'ah, they fall asleep while they're listening to the khutbah. It might be the imam is going to be giving a very long khutbah, and he maybe was tired, he never slept the night before or something, and he fell asleep. If his buttocks is still on the ground, and his sitting position, buttocks on the ground, he's not laying down. His back is not on the ground. He's laying, his buttocks sitting on the ground. He's not laying down, but his buttocks is sitting position. And he wakes up, he can just continue salah if he had wudu before that. Or anything leaving the private parts like urine or stools. So, if something comes from your private parts, urine or stools, it breaks your wudu. Or touching a non-mahram. If you touch a non-mahram, it breaks your wudu. Okay. Number 4, encountering impurities, najis on one's clothing, body, or place of prostration during prayer. If impurities get on one's clothes, body, or place of prostration while in prayer, the prayer will be nullified unless the impurities can be removed immediately. So if you have impurities on you and you can remove it immediately after knowing it's there, then your salah will still remain valid. But if you know it's there and you do not remove it, then your salah will be null and void. An example: if one prays and bird droppings falls on one's face, if it is removed immediately, then the prayer would remain valid. However, if he knew there is bird droppings on his face and he does not remove it immediately, his prayer is nullified. So he's performing salah and there's normally no birds around. Depending, some scholars will differ when there's not a birds around and you can't avoid it, but you can avoid it. There's no birds around, and you're making salah, and how you just see a bird dropping fall onto your face. You know it's on the face, and we know there's najis. So what do? If you know it's on your face and you don't remove that from your head, then your salah is null and void. But if you just take it off of your head in 2 movements, you take it off of your head, so to one side, you continue your salah will still be valid. If the impurities came in contact with his hand or clothes, he must stop praying and remove it and start the prayer from the beginning. So if it's only pray and clothes, you can't now remove your clothes because you expose your aura. So then you stop your salah then, because your salah will be null and void because you have najasa, you have najis, you have impurities on your clothing. You stop your clothing, you remove that impurities, and then you continue with your then you put on new clothing and all of those things, and you then start salah from fresh. It should be noted, if one performs prayer and afterwards see that there are impurities on one's clothing, one must repeat the salah. However, there are other schools of thought, as I mentioned before in a previous session, that are of the opinion that the prayer will be valid. An example will be the Maliki school of thought. I mentioned before that if this happens, the prayer is valid, and this is in the Maliki school of thought, or even the Shafi school of thought. You have to repeat the salah. Number 5, exposing a portion of one's nakedness, awrah, during the prayer. If one exposes a portion of one's nakedness intentionally, the prayer will be nullified. However, if it's done unintentionally, it should be immediately covered and the prayer will remain valid. Example. An example of intentional acts would be a woman intentionally removing her hijab during prayer. So if a woman has a hijab on and she removes the hijab, she is exposing her nakedness, her awrah, and because of this, her salah will be null and void if she done it intentionally. Or a man intentionally raises his shorts above his knees. So he has shorts that covers his knees, and how he's in the salah, he intentionally lifts it up until he exposes the above of his knees. He exposes that which is between his navel and the knees, and if he does that, that salah will be null and void, will be nullified. Examples of unintentional acts would be if the wind blows a woman's hijab open and she immediately covers her nakedness, the prayer would remain valid. Because she unintentionally, she didn't even intended for the wind to blow or anything like that. She just opened up, and a portion of a hair or something was, exposed, and she closed it again. Immediately, a salah also remained valid. It should be noted, if one performs prayer and afterwards realized that a small portion of one's nakedness was exposed during the prayer, one must repeat the prayer. However, there are other schools of thought, as I mentioned before in the previous session, that are of the opinion that the prayer will be valid. An example will be the Hanbali school of thought. The Hanbali school of thought will say that you don't repeat the salah. However, like I mentioned, the Shafi'i school of thought, you have to repeat the salah. Just to understand why I'm mentioning the different school of thoughts, when someone asks you a question, usually look for something that will suit them in a way that will not put them in a hardship. If someone performed the salah all their life and there's something always sticks out and they did not know that they have to cover every single thing of their aura, we'll look for a school of thought that will make things easy for that person, because to repeat 10 years of salah or 20 years of salah is something difficult upon a person. And therefore, when someone asks you a question, you normally, a scholar will look at what will make things easier for that individual. But when giving over the ruling, they will mention that it's important to cover up and not expose your nakedness. And it's important not to have any najis on your clothing. Okay. Number 6, changing one's intention during the prayer. Changing one's intention during prayer nullifies the prayer. It can be nullified by changing one's intention to a conditional intention as well. So changing it or changing it to a conditional intention. So let's look at for examples. An example of changing one's intention would be intending to leave the prayer. So while you are in the salah, you made that intention that I want to leave the salah. Then your salah is null and void. You can't just join your salah now. Your salah is null and void. You can't build on the salah is null and void. An example of changing one's intention to a conditional intention would be intending to leave the prayer if someone enters a room that you are praying in. Both the above intentions, if intended, the prayer would be nullified. This is because one should be decisive in one's intention. So if you make salah and you say, okay, if someone now enters, I am out of my salah. Immediately while you are in your salah and you made that intention in your head, even though someone did not enter, because you had this kind of decisive, you had this kind of flimsy intention in your salah, it was not decisive, automatically your salah is null and void. Because you have to have a decisive, a strong intention that you want to complete the salah. You have to have an intention for entire salah, for your salah to be valid. Number 7, turning away from the direction of the qibla during prayer. This refers to turning of one's chest. Turning one's chest intentionally away from the qibla nullifies one's prayer. However, if it's done unintentionally, in the case of someone turning the person who is praying by force, and the person praying returns to the direction of the qibla immediately, his prayer would remain valid. So while you're praying, someone behind you pushes you on one side, and then you move, or you move to the left hand side, and now your chest is no longer facing the qibla, and you turn very quickly back to the qibla, then your prayer would remain valid. On the other hand, turning one's head does not nullify the prayer. I want to ask now, why are we speaking about the head? An example of turning one's head would be if one is worried that while praying, one's child might be in danger. He or she is then allowed to momentarily glance over to the child to see if everything is fine and continue the prayer. So while you are in the salah, what happens? The child's maybe on your left hand side, and you're hearing sounds, and you are scared the child might walk down the steps and fall and trip, and you want to see if the child is actually sitting down and not doing that, or you see the child maybe might go to a fire, or might go to take a knife or something sharp, and you want to check that out. You're allowed to, for a moment, look and glance over to the child and continue salah. So you turn your head, not your chest, you turn your head to the child to do this. And this is sometimes even mother is making salah, and the mother, it's very difficult to, to perform a salah, and the child is around. And so therefore, this is better than leaving the prayer entirely. So at least the mother makes and performs a salah, but still glances over to the child to see if the child is okay. And this is allowed in the salah. But of course, not to turn the head is the best if possible. But if you have to, it does not invalidate your salah. But turning your chest away from the salah will invalidate your salah. Sorry, turning your chest away from the qibla will invalidate your salah. Number 8, eating and drinking during prayer. Eating and drinking intentionally during prayer, be it a large quantity or small quantity, nullifies the prayer. So if you eat something that's stuck on your teeth, when you're eating that in your prayer, your prayer is nullified because it's a small quantity, it's stuck onto your teeth. Or something big, you're eating a burger or something. Allah alam, you maybe do not know about this. But you're eating something, maybe you newly reverted to Islam and you don't know about not eating salah. So eating, drinking intentionally during prayer, be it a large quantity or small quantity, nullifies salah. However, if it's done unintentionally, forgetfully, or ignorant on its ruling, so if you are newly revert to Islam and you don't know about not eating salah, and now you have something small in your mouth, maybe a piece of sweet or something, and eating it in salah, it is a small quantity, the prayer would remain valid. It is therefore recommended to clean one's teeth before praying to remove any food that might be stuck in between the teeth, so to not swallow it during the prayer. So you can't eat anything that's between your teeth. If it's very small and you can't distinguish it and it's in saliva, that's okay. But if it's something big stuck in between your teeth, sometimes if you eat a mango and the hairs of the mangoes like in your teeth, and or you eat corn and the corn is in your teeth, and now while in salah you suck your teeth to eat or to get those things out of your teeth and you swallow it by eating it, then of course your salah will be null and void. But if you done it, forgetfully or ignorant on its ruling, then your salah will still remain valid. Number 9, laughing or crying during prayer. If one laughs or cries intentionally, and the sound of the laughter or crying is made up of 2 consecutive letters, even though it does not have any meaning, the prayer is nullified. However, if it is a small amount of laughter or crying that is silent without any sounds, the prayer would remain valid. So if you are laughing but you're not giving any sound while you're laughing, you can laugh without any sound. You're laughing without any sound, or you're crying but you don't give any sound, then your prayer will also remain valid. If one is forced to laugh or cry against one's intention, the prayer would remain valid. Sometimes, subhanallah, if you have, those who have soft hearts and have khushu', humility in the salah, and they listen to the imam reciting and understand what the imam is reciting, they can't help themselves from crying. Because they can't help themselves, they don't want to cry, but they can't help themselves from crying. That will not, nullify your salah, because you are not doing it intentionally. Your emotion got the best of you and you started to cry. Or someone but somehow makes you laugh in salah without you be able to control that. You just laugh like that, or without being able to control it, then your salah would remain valid. But once you can control and you do it intentionally, then of course your salah will be null and void. And the 10th, the last one we have here, there are many more, but the last one that we have here is if one apostate during the prayer. May Allah protect us. Meaning you leave the fold of Islam, the prayer would be nullified. Because you mentioned one of the conditions that you have to be Muslim. So you are no longer Muslim, and therefore the salah is nullified. And remember, we spoke about this. Once you come back to the fold of Islam, you have to pay in those missed salahs while you were in the state of apostasy. Okay. We move on to the differences between the prayer of a male and a female. Okay. Number 1, the male. It is recommended for a male to spread his elbows away from his body during bowing and prostration, and to move his thighs away from his stomach during prostration. So while the male is in his bowing position, the ruku', he spreads out his elbows. His elbows shouldn't be close to him. He spreads it out. This is especially when you speak about someone performing salah alone or as the imam. the Prophet ﷺ spread out his elbows, they could see his armpits. They could see his armpits. So when he's in the bowing position and the prostration, he opens up his elbows. He doesn't keep it close to his body. He opens up. So that is the sunnah how the Prophet ﷺ performed, and therefore it is recommended for a male to do that, and to move his thighs away from his stomach. So you move your thighs away from your stomach. You don't put your thighs close to your stomach. You move it away. So you actually space out your legs, your thighs, and your stomach. So you will be a bit longer in your salah compared to drawing yourself closer. You are expanding yourself. You are loosening yourself. Okay. This is how the Prophet ﷺ performed his salah. However, if he is following in congregation, he should not spread his arms away from his body to such an extent that it might place the person on his sides in discomfort. Some people, they want to follow the sunnah and they spread their elbows, and the person on the side is getting a bit in a narrow place to make salah. Some people are big and they do it. They think that they are performing the sunnah, but they are harming the person next to. And this is a principle that if there are two things, harming and acquiring a benefit, we rather prevent the harm than acquiring the benefit. So what is the harm here? The harm is harming your brother that's next to you. The benefit is a sunnah. If you harm someone, you get punished. You are sinning. If you do not acquire a sunnah, there's nothing upon you. So you rather not want a sin than acquiring a sin to do something recommended. So it's very important to understand that. There are many things in the Sharia speaks the same. If you are married and your wife or your husband doesn't, basically your wife, doesn't like a certain type of atr, atr, oud is one of the perfumes or the atr that the Prophet ﷺ loved wearing. It's a sunnah to wear oud. But the oud has a very strong smell, and a lot of people, some people can't take that smell. They get headaches when they smell that. And if you know that if you're going to be with your wife and you put this oud on to follow the sunnah, and your wife's going to get headaches, then it's a sunnah for you not to wear the oud. Even though it's sunnah for you not to wear that because you are causing harm. There's no benefit there, you're causing harm by wearing that. So it's very important to understand the fiqh very well when doing certain things that are sunnah. Not everything, not all sunnah is always good to do if it causes harms to others. The females. It is recommended for the female to draw her bodily limbs close together during the prayer. She holds her elbows close to her body during the bowing and prostration. She places her thighs close to her stomach during her prostration. This is, the order of Prophet ﷺ to a few others, to in a hadith speaking, addressing the female Sahaba, that this is shows you that it more in a way that will conceal her, that she shouldn't expose her by going closer to each other, that you don't see her bodily limbs and these things. So it's more in a way more haya, it's more in a way that shows a modesty by her drawing herself close, then exposing all her limbs in the salah by stretching out. So it's for females, for rather to draw closer in the salah. She places her thighs close to her stomach during the prostration. This is the opposite of males. Males, they during prostration, they would move the thighs away from their stomachs. And of course, the opposite as well. Males, they will spread the elbows, and females, they will do their elbows close to their body. The differences between the prayer of a male and female. Number 2. Male. It's recommended for a male to recite audibly during the audible prayers and softly during the soft prayers. Female. It is also recommended for the female to recite audibly during the audible prayers and softly in the soft prayers. However, if the female is among strange non-mahram males, she should recite the audible prayers softly to avoid any fitna temptation. Because the voice of the female, it is something attractive to a male, and therefore she should stop, any fitna temptations whereby the the males might find that desirable, listening to the female reciting. So it is best that she avoids that and she recites in a soft voice when she recites the audible prayers. The differences between the prayer of a male and female, number 3. The male makes a tasbih, says loudly subhanallah when he wants to alert the imam, or if he wants to bring attention to someone during the prayer, like giving the permission of a visitor to enter the house. So first we speak about alert. So if the imam made a mistake, so let's say the imam, goes straight into the prostration and does not perform the ruku, does not perform the bow, then of course the followers will say subhanallah. So the imam will be alerted he done something wrong in his salah, so he will think, what did he do wrong? So this is to alert the imam that he done something wrong in his salah by saying subhanallah to alert the imam. Likewise, you're allowed to say subhanallah to alert someone what is around you. If there is someone by the door and you hear knocking on the door and you want to now tell this person to enter, but you want to tell the person that you are performing salah as well, because you can't speak in salah. You're allowed to say subhanallah, so the person might hear that you're in salah, and the person knows usually when you are in salah you can enter the house, or that you are in the house. Because sometimes people need permission to enter the house if they're not given permission before. Some people are given permission before they to enter the house, so they know if they are in the house, they can actually enter the house, and therefore you're allowed to say subhanallah for the person to know that. For females, it's a bit different. So the female does in place of the tasbih, the tasfiq. So you get the tasbih and the tasfiq. So what's the difference between the two? Tasbih is to say subhanallah. The female, as we mentioned before, she shouldn't speak, because you see, as voice is attractive, and males, might find a desire to listen to that, which will cause a type of fitna. So what does she do? This is when she claps the back of her left hand on the palm of her right hand to alert the imam or those around her. So she does that, she claps. Not like a normal clap we have, but the clap here is that usually when you have your hands on your chest, or like I mentioned, above the navel and below the chest, we have our right palm on the backside of your left hand. So what you do for the females, you just move a bit away from your chest, and now there's a gap. So you take your left hand, back of the left hand, and then you clap it against the right palm of your right hand, or the palm of the right hand. It will make a clapping sound, so that whoever hears that will know, okay, either the imam made a mistake in the salah, or saying that, okay, I'm here, the house, you can enter the house, whatever. Okay. The difference between the prayer of a male and a female, number 4. The nakedness of a male during prayer that must be covered is the area between his navel and his knees. Therefore, if he prays and only covers what is between the navel and the knees, his prayer would be valid. But of course, you see, this is the bare minimum, and of course, this is something you are doing which is not desirable, something that you are doing. If you only have that, then your salah will be valid. But of course, you should take your zina, you should take your adornment in salah, you should wear the best you can when you are in salah, because you're speaking to your Lord, your Creator. The nakedness of a female during prayer that must be covered is her complete body, excluding her face and hands. And the last difference between the prayer of a male and female, number 5. The male, it is recommended for a male to render the adhan and iqamah at every prayer time. Those few times whereby the Iqamah will be rendered, by the Mu'adhin, and then before the Salah, we have the Iqamah. And if you're at home, you perform the Iqamah, and if you want, you can perform the Adhan and the Iqamah. However, for females, it is not recommended for female to render the Adhan. However, it is recommended for her to render the Iqamah at every prayer. So when she performs the prayer alone, she performs the Iqamah, and she will then thereafter performs a prayer. For the male, it's both the Adhan and the Iqamah, but for the female, it is only the Iqamah. And with that, inshallah, we will end off today's session. Are there any questions, inshallah? It was a bit of a lengthy session, but very important for you to know all of those things in your salah, especially those things that, you're omitting in salah, what you should do, as well as I mentioned the difference between the males and the females, and as well as the nullifiers of salah, which is very important as well to know. So inshallah, is there any questions?
Sheikh, may I ask a question?
Yes, Fadal.
So I just wanted to know when it came to the nullifiers of the wudu, sleeping but on the side. What is the wisdom behind that? Have the scholars discussed that in terms of why sleeping in that position is fine, but not the other position?
Okay, so sleeping on the buttocks, that is okay. That does not nullify your wudu. Sleeping on the sides will nullify your wudu because you're not sitting on your buttocks. So both of your buttocks has to be sit flat on the ground. And the reason for this, as scholars have said, if you have your buttocks sitting on the ground, it's like a knot that you're knotting. So no winds can leave your body. While you're awake, you will know if you passed a wind. While you're sleeping, you do not know if you passed a wind. Now, a way to make sure that no wind leaves your body is when you sit on your buttocks. And this is the reason why scholars have said that the sleeping does not break your wudu. It's the not knowing if you passed a wind or not. So if you do not know that you passed a wind or not, and this is taken from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the beginning of, the Prophet ﷺ used to delay Isha Salah, and it's sunnah to delay Isha Salah. And the Sahaba, they were, individuals who used to work, hard work, they used to do laborious work, and at night they used to be tired, and they used to go to perform their Isha Salah, and they used to wait for the Prophet ﷺ to come. So the Prophet ﷺ used to delay it a bit to get the reward, and therefore they used to wait. And when they used to wait, they used to fall asleep. And the hadith says that they used to snore. They could hear them snore while they are sitting down. And then when the Iqamah went, they used to stand up and they perform the Salah. If it did break their wudu, the Prophet ﷺ would have let them know that they should perform their wudu, but the Prophet ﷺ allowed them to perform the Salah. Scholars took from that, because while you're sitting down, it's like a knot that you're tying. It's very difficult for the wind to leave the buttocks. It's possible, but it's very difficult, highly unlikely. While you're laying and the pressure is off of your buttocks, it's easy for wind to escape. But while you are sitting, it's a bit difficult. That is what is mentioned by the scholars. Hope that gives you some clarity to it, inshallah.
Shukran, Sheikh.
Have fun.
You're welcome to type your questions on the chat, or if you want to unmute your mic, you are more than welcome to.
Okay, I have a question here. Okay, how does one make up salah if one leaves the fold of Islam? If you leave the fold of Islam, you are a non-Muslim. If you are a non-Muslim, of course, salah is not compulsory upon you. But when you enter the fold of Islam thereafter, then salah becomes compulsory, as well as the salah that you missed. Because salahs become compulsory upon a person as soon as a person is a Muslim, and you mentioned this is mukallaf. So as a Muslim mukallaf now, all salahs become compulsory. If you leave the fold of Islam and return, the salahs that you missed out while you left the fold of Islam will still be compulsory upon you. Therefore, you have to make up those salahs. Very important to note that. The question here asks, how do you make it up? So if you, for example, remember that you did not perform maybe a year of salah or a year of salah, therefore you can perform a salah after your fard salah. So when you perform fajr, you perform your fajr salah that you have to perform that day, and then you perform another fajr salah thereafter. Dhuhr salah, you perform your dhuhr salah for the day and another dhuhr salah thereafter. And then you wait for an entire year. Once the year is done, okay, now you know, okay, you have made up all your missed salahs, and therefore you just perform the salah of that day itself. So that's when you have to make up your salah. There are some people who are Muslims and they were but maybe neglectful in the salah. They do not perform salah maybe for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, and they do the same thing. When they perform their own salah, they perform another salah. And if they want to, they can perform a few salahs the same day as well, maybe 3 or 4 salahs. And like that, they are all catching up on the salahs that they missed out. As you mentioned before in the virtues of salah, to perform a salah is very important because that's the first thing will be questioned Yawm Qiyamah. That is the opinion of those. And likewise, in the hadith he mentions, it's very important as well for us to perform our sunnah salah, because in the event that you do not perform maybe correctly a fard salah, the sunnah salah will take that place. It will help us, to fulfill those gaps in our salahs, our fard salahs that he did not perform. Now, I hope that answers your question, inshallah. I'll give a minute or so for any other questions, inshallah, before I hand it over to Ilyas. Okay, there's another question. So if you do not make dhuhr salah today, would you then need to make up 2 dhuhr salahs next day? Okay, this is very important. The Prophet Muhammad said that if you missed a salah, if you slept, overslept, or you forgot about your salah, then you have to make the salah when you remember that salah. So this is a different situation compared to someone who did not perform salah for a year, because it's very difficult to perform all that in one go. But this is only one salah. So in that instance, once you remember that salah, so example would be you did not perform dhuhr salah for that day. It is now Isha salah. So you first perform your dhuhr salah for the day, then you perform the other salah. So you always do that sequence. So before you go to the new salah, you perform the salahs that you missed before that. Of course, you mentioned that this is, things that will be questionable Yawm al-Qiyamah because you can't skip salahs. But let's say you forgot about that salah. So you forgot to perform the dhuhr salah. And you forgot to perform, maybe for some reason that you may be newly, revert to Islam, you forgot to perform a few salahs per day, because you usually do not perform your salahs. So you forgot to perform dhuhr salah, you forgot to perform asr salah, you forgot to perform maghrib salah, and then it's isha salah. Now you remember that you did not perform your dhuhr, your asr, and your maghrib. What do you do in that instance? You first perform your dhuhr, then you perform your asr, then you perform your maghrib, and then you perform your isha salah, because you're making up the salahs that you have missed. As the Prophet ﷺ said that if you overslept, or you have forgotten about the salah, then you have to perform it when you remember the salah. So of course the salah, Isha salah, you remember that you forgot all the salahs before, then you would first perform those salahs. As for salahs that you have performed many years back, of course that there are many salahs, and therefore you have to work in a way to perform all of those salahs. So you work in a systematic way by performing a salah after your daily salah, and therefore with that you can work out how long it will take for you to make up your missed salahs. Hope that answers the question, inshallah. And Allah knows best. F1. If there's no other questions, I'll then hand it over to Ilyas, inshallah. تفضل. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We'd just like to say Jazakallah khairan to Sheikh Khalid for a very, once again, a very thorough talk. We are always very appreciative of the depth. I think as Muslims, we always grow up and we think that Salah is just this ritual, mechanical activity. But once we go into the deeper meanings, we start to see the intellectual rigor of our scholars that have come before us, really trying to examine all the different possibilities and trying to make sure that we are always upright and following the sunnah to the best of our ability. So, alhamdulillah, this is, we're going to take a break from these talks next week because of Eid. But the following week, we are going to have the guest lecture by Maulana Venka. So that's going to be something to look forward to on how do we spiritualize our deen as Muslims. And then also just to say, obviously, we are, as we know, we are talking about Salah, but we are in the context of a pandemic, and we make dua for all those who are sick, that Allah grants them shifa, and all those who have passed away, that He bestows upon them the highest abode of Jannah, and all those who are lost and looking for guidance, that Allah gives them that guidance, especially during these difficult times. And that's all from us. Barakallahu feekum wa afu minkum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.